Last week, Dan asked, what do you believe? I believe memory loss is preventable and that our brains can heal. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do everything that I talk about today. Dan talked about patching the holes in your leaky roof. Turns out if you patch roughly 12 of 36 to 52, the rest of the holes start to patch themselves. So most importantly, I think, to take away from this lecture today is just pick one or pick 10, but get started. And my advice is that you find a plus one. Somebody will do this with you who's encouraging and upbeat and excited about it too, because we know one of the pillars of good memory is community. So what are we talking about? What are the changes, and what do we mean when we say patch your holes? This isn't the way to patch them, by the way. We're going to talk about the right way to do this. The approach is multifactorial treatment, and that basically means instead of a silver bullet, this is silver buckshot. So you go at it with everything you've got. We know that the medications we've had target one small aspect of memory loss, Alzheimer's, dementia, but nothing hits all of it. And when you think about it, of course, because nothing caused, not one single thing caused all of it. So what we do is look at the multi-cause problem of memory loss and say, well, what are the main contributing factors? And those would be inflammation, lack of nutrients, toxin buildup in our brains, vascular disease, and trauma. If we know these are the causes, then we have to address what causes the causes. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today is anti-inflammatory measures, toxin-free living, nutrient-dense eating, pro-circulation steps to take. And if you don't know what all of those are yet, you will by the time the talk is done. I did list genetics on here, and that was an interesting one to me because we now can find out, do you have the Alzheimer's gene? But it turns out that the Alzheimer's gene doesn't doom you to Alzheimer's. You can end run your genes. And I found that to be pretty comforting. What you have to focus on is these areas, and whether you have the ApoE4, that's the Alzheimer's gene, or not, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll suffer Alzheimer's. Just like Dan mentioned, getting into old age, we used to say, well, yeah, of course she's forgetting, she's getting older. But that really shouldn't happen. That isn't a part of normal aging. And we know that now. What would most of you think if I said skip breakfast, make sure you butter your vegetables, eat red meat and especially the fat, salt your food, and get a tan? Yeah, all right, fantastic. I thought I was going to be run out of here. I thought you'd be wondering how I got myself on this panel of experts. Well, that was a pretty cool response. All right, so these are all things that I hope you'll actually consider doing when you leave here today. All right, so last week Dan and Dave both made the point that novelty is good for your brain. So buckle your seatbelts because I think a lot of this is going to be new and you'll be doing your brain a very good turn in the next hour or so. How do we know what works? Not everything about being a caveman was really fabulous. If I've got a severe infection, I'm going to be pretty pleased to get antibiotics at the local ER. But a lot of the way that we lived and ate then is the reason that we survive to live and eat now. And so we can get some of our best ideas by looking back to when we were cavemen and kind of figuring out, well, what were our bodies designed to do specifically? These ancestors of ours were barefoot, they were naked, and there's an end run around that one too, if you want one. They got a lot of sunshine on their skin. They didn't use sunscreens. They slept when the sun went down, and they rose when the sun came up, and they did that by getting blue light in their eyes, and the blue light would tell them it's up time. They ate fermented foods. They ate berries that were rotting on the trees. They dug up food from mineral-rich soils, and they encountered a lot of organisms and parasites. They hunted animals, and they didn't just eat their meat. They ate their marrow and their fat and their organs. I hope you're getting an idea of what the talk is going to be about today. They were gatherers, but they were not growers until very recently. They fasted when food was scarce, and they stood a lot, and they walked a lot. They lived in close contact with others in tight-knit communities, but they had to cooperate in order to survive. No one, it's worth mentioning, used Purell, and no one drank neon fruit punch or ate anything neon. No one ate Cinnabons or Twinkies. No one used blue screens, iPads, phones, or video games in the cave at night to fall asleep. There were no depleted soils from over-farming. They didn't eat and breathe and wear preservatives and insecticides and emissions and flame retardants. They didn't eat grasses or grains, and they didn't spray their prairies, and we really shouldn't either. There's a growing group of people calling themselves biohackers, and that basically means like you hack into your computer, you hack your own biology. So you really pay attention to three things: food, mood, and poop. And that'll tell you a lot about how you're doing. No one knows you as well as you know you. Not your doctor, not your family members, nobody else. Listen to how you feel, pay attention, and you can learn a lot about how to live your best life. The treatment, what does it involve? I've got 2 lines on here because I'm going to cover the most important stuff up front. I've included a lot in that handout, so even if you just sat back and listened and tried to soak in what you hear today, you should be all right getting a really solid start on this lifestyle and reversing memory loss after today. We'll talk about diet, I put that at the top, detoxification, exercise, sleep, supplements, spirituality, breathing, and brain stimulation. Those last 3 we won't likely get to today, but I'm hoping that we can cover at least some of the top 5. As far as diet goes, cells need energy to function. Usually that energy comes from glucose or sugars. That's the carbohydrates and the proteins that we break down to turn into glucose, and that's normally how our brain gets its energy, especially the way that we eat these days. We rarely run out of proteins and carbohydrates, so usually our body is trying to function on glucose for energy. But there are cells that can't use glucose well. That's diabetes, insulin resistance, inflammation in the brain. You may have heard Alzheimer's called type 3 diabetes, and what they mean by that is your brain cells may be okay, but they can't take the glucose up and use it. So it's not that they died or that they're done for, but they just don't have any energy to function. There's another form of energy called ketones. Ketones help prevent and reverse brain disorders because they provide an alternate energy source. So our brains can take up ketones and use that to turn into ATP, which is our little energy bundles that make us function. Effects, like I said, are measurable within a couple of hours, and if you have ketone bodies available in your bloodstream, you will actually think more clearly and remember better today. So how do we get these ketone bodies? There are 2 ways. The first one is fasting, and the second one is a shortcut. And both of them are actually important for different reasons. So the best of all worlds is that you'll try fasting and you'll try the shortcut. Fasting. I mentioned that our energy comes from what we eat. It's fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. The fats don't get turned into energy, though, until the proteins and the carbohydrates are used. So it's the process of turning fat into energy that produces these ketone bodies in your liver. They're very good for your brain, so you want these in your bloodstream. Whether you burn fat from the food you're eating or fat from your spare tire, it'll produce ketone bodies, and that's good for memory, weight loss, metabolic health, disease prevention, and it may even help us live longer. What I'm talking about when I say fast is that you just have to stop eating carbohydrates and proteins. You don't have to stop eating fats. Now you might say, well, how can I get a full meal of fats? And there are actually delicious ways to do that. In your handout, I have a link to something called Bulletproof Coffee. And it's a delicious way to make coffee in the morning. And basically, you take coffee and you blend it in the blender so that it gets nice and frothy with, believe it or not, butter and MCT oil. Or if you don't choose to make that recipe and you really just want to get the fast going longer, you can just make your coffee with heavy whipping cream. Don't use half and half. Don't use skim milk if you like your coffee creamed. Use heavy whipping cream because the fat is what you need to get. Hope to convince you of that in further slides here. So what do I mean by fast? Try to go 12 or more hours with no carbohydrates and no protein. Again, you can have fat. I've gotten used to taking this brain octane oil we'll talk about just plain on a spoon, and I like it. There's no taste, there's no flavor, it just gives me energy. And so there are ways to get just fat, but what you want to do is try to get 12 hours between your last meal of the night and breakfast. So put off breakfast, eat early, whatever it is that gets you that 12 hours. Even better if you can get a few more hours than that. Now, I was one of those people that if you had told me 5 years ago fast for 12 hours, I would have cried because there's no way I ever went 12 hours without eating. I thought that I had the perfect diet. I was eating high carb, low fat, lots of multi-grains. I was a vegetarian, no meat, never buttered anything. I lots of times just had like a piece of whole grain toast, no butter, nothing on it for breakfast. But I found myself shrinking my nighttime. So if my eyes would kind of flutter awake at 5 in the morning, I'd think, oh my goodness, I get to have breakfast. It's technically morning. So I was out there eating a lot. Now I can easily go 22 hours or more without eating. I don't think about eating anymore. And it's a much more pleasant way to exist. So try to build your fast up to 12 hours or more. Even better if you don't eat when it's dark. And there are biological reasons for that. But it's better to do your eating in the sunshine, kind of like we did back in the cave days. The key to making this work, welcome fats back into your diet. This is really important for your brain. We've been starving our brain by buying into the whole high carb, low fat myth. Fat's got an undeserved bad rap. The only bad fats are bad fats. Hydrogenated fats, trans fats, polyunsaturated fatty acids, like corn oil, soy, sunflower oil, safflower oil. Those are oftentimes the things that everybody's cooking with when I talk to groups. What you really ought to be using is coconut oil. The Cliff Notes version on how we got so far off track, and I find this just amazing. There was one man, Dr. Ansel Keys, who basically did a broad study, cherry-picked the data, and said, if you cut out these countries that don't fit my perfect line, then saturated fats track with heart disease. But the problem is he didn't include a lot of his data points. That's cheating. So he convinced the government that we ought to have all Americans on off of saturated fats. And then George McGovern stepped in and decided that there was a rush to this whole thing and that he needed to push this way of eating out on the public. And it's been a 45-year campaign against saturated fats, and I believe it's ongoing. But like I said, it's a myth. So that's kind of the sum total of how we got where we are. George McGovern said, I would argue that senators don't have the luxury that a research scientist does of waiting until every last shred of evidence is in. Well, those people who took the time looked at Dr. Key's research, and what actually tracked with heart disease was sugar. Sugar consumption tracks with heart disease, and it also tracks with memory loss. A study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease showed that a diet rich in carbohydrates was linked to an 89% increase in dementia. Diet rich in fat was correlated with a 44% decrease risk of dementia. Sugars and carbs cause inflammation, and inflammation is the root of heart disease, arthritis, Alzheimer's, and many other evils. Since you'll be eating good fats now, you want to eliminate the bad fats and get the good fats. I especially like coconut oil. I do all my cooking with coconut oil. It can withstand high heats. So that's a good one to just have sitting out on your counter and available for anything. I roast vegetables in coconut oil, and then I pour butter over them, and then I salt them. These are all listed in your handout as well, but this is what you want to start eating. Another favorite of mine, I've mentioned it several times, is butter. Butter is a wonderful food, but you have to make sure that it is pasture butter or grass-fed butter. And good one is Organic Valley, Kerrygold, or Anchor are the brands that I buy. So we are what we eat, right? You hear that all the time. Our cows are what they ate, and so is their milk. So you can only get what goes in. Compared to butter from grain-fed cows, grass-fed is higher in omega-3s. Those are the good oils that are good for your heart and brain. It's very high in beta-carotene. It actually has more than in carrots. All the fat-soluble vitamins, A, K, D, and E, and all the antioxidants. And it's loaded with butyrate, which is an anti-inflammatory. It heals the gut. It decreases brain inflammation, and it causes your electrical circuits to speed up. So you think faster and more clearly when you're on butter. Butter also reduces the risk of obesity. And in individuals, in one study in Australia, the people who ate the most grass-fed, high-fat dairy products had a 69% lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease than those who ate the lowest amounts of dairy products. I mentioned fasting, and then the shortcut. This is the shortcut. It's MCT oil, which is medium-chain triglycerides. Triglycerides can come with carbons chained together in any different length. So medium chain is 6 carbon, 8 carbon, 10 carbons together. The reason this oil is special is that it doesn't require you to run out of carbs or proteins before it will produce the ketone bodies for your brain. So this is your shortcut. And this oil in particular, brain octane, has just that carbon 8 chain, the C8 chain. And the carbon 8 is the best one at making ketone bodies. The C8 is the granddaddy. So this is very purified coconut oil. Coconut oil will give you a lot of benefits all by itself. So you don't just want to have MCT oil, but this has it does a really good job of making ketone bodies. It's the fastest, easiest, and in the fewest steps for your liver. There's a really important note that comes along with this. Go slowly, at risk of disaster pants. So don't learn this one the hard way, just trust me. You want to go 1 teaspoon at a time and find out how well your body handles this. What you'll notice is that your stomach starts to gurgle. You might feel nauseous. You feel a little bit off. If that happens, just take a small handful of cashews and eat those, and it'll stop right away, as long as you didn't have 4 tablespoons on your first outing. So you start with 1 teaspoon, and you can put it in your coffee, like I said, and you blend it in the blender, and you get it all frothy like a latte with your butter. Go to that recipe on the link. You can drizzle it over salads. You can drizzle it on your omelet or put it in soups and stews. I take it plain some mornings. What you want to do is work up to 2 tablespoons a day. I work with Parkinson's patients. We're reversing their Parkinson's. I have people who are taking 6 tablespoons a day, and they really notice the days that they're without. So this is by far and away my favorite MCT oil. It's also third-party tested, so we know there aren't contaminants in it. When you go to the website, you'll see there's the oil, and then there's also the capsules. The capsules can't get you nearly enough. So I take those when I travel because it's more convenient than a big bottle of oil in a suitcase. But really what you want to do is order the oil for daily use. When you're using fat for your fuel, when you're making ketone bodies, the biochemical reaction uses more water. So make sure you stay hydrated with purified water or mineral water. You don't stay hydrated with Coke. Your diet, in percentage calories, you're going to be eating 70% of your calories in fat. And again, that includes saturated fats. 20% of your calories in protein, and 10% in carbohydrates. But I'll quickly add that 10% in carbohydrate calories is a mess of vegetables. So you're going to actually be eating mostly vegetables. That's going to make up the bulk of your diet. Literally the bulk, because that's your fiber too. So fill your plate with vegetables, but that's only 10% of the calories. What you really want to focus on and get back to is the fats. Include wild-caught, free-range, grass-fed organic meats. Just like grass-fed butter, grass-fed beef really is better and it tastes better. You are what you eat. Your beef is what it ate. And a lot of times beef is given gummy bears for fattening them up and antibiotics, interestingly, also for fattening them up. Grass-fed beef has 12 times the amount of the good omega-3 oils, 3 times less of the omega-6s, which we generally get too much of in our diet. We are trying to reduce. It has 5 times the amount of vitamin A and E as the grain-fed cattle, double the beta-carotene, and it's got no hormones and no antibiotics. So it is more expensive. This way of eating is more expensive. It's probably cheaper, though, than being sick. The World Health Organization has declared that red meat is a carcinogen. That was based on observational studies. They basically surveyed people over the last 24 hours, what had they eaten, and then they figured out how healthy they were. But they didn't take into account what meat they ate. And most Americans aren't reporting grass-fed beef. They're reporting hot dogs with nitrates and nitrites, and there are good hot dogs too, by the way. But they didn't categorize health according to the type of meat people were eating. So if you look at studies out of Costa Rica or New Zealand where they're eating grass-fed beef, there's no correlation. Grass-fed beef is good for you. Don't cut out the fat. Don't buy the low-fat version. Also, eating cholesterol does not cause your cholesterol to go up. Every cell in your body needs cholesterol. We have evolved over a lot of years, and we don't keep anything around that isn't important. So if every cell in your body uses cholesterol, you need cholesterol. Your brain uses 25% of all that you eat. So what I find to be kind of the sad thing about the craze and get your cholesterol down and everybody taking statins, there are a lot of people who actually don't have enough cholesterol. The demon in that story is low-density lipoproteins. No one, not your doctor, no one is trying to actually get cholesterol itself done. Cholesterol doesn't cause the problem. Low-density lipoproteins do, and there are two kinds. There's the small, glycated, sticky, bad kind, and there's the large, fluffy, benign, no problem kind. And what we thought our diet was targeting and eliminating cholesterol from our food was actually those small, sticky, glycated, low-density lipoproteins. Those are the ones you want to get rid of, and you can probably guess that it's sugar that causes that. They're glycated, they're sugarized, basically. You want beef with the fat, you want eggs with the yolk. Go back to making eggs for breakfast and bacon and sausage. And chop in a whole bunch of vegetables. Eat organ meats also. Organ meats are fantastic for you, especially beef liver. There's a liver pate at Waseda Farms Market in De Pere that's just wonderful, and they include a lot of other organs in there. So you can get your kidneys and your tongue all ground up into something that, surprising to me, tastes delicious. You also need nutrient-dense foods. Any food will give you calories. Any food you eat, you can burn for energy in one way or another. Maybe not ketone bodies, but energy. What you want to do is make your calories count for more. So think about every bite you put into your mouth, making it count. You want to pack it with vitamins and minerals and substances that are good for you. There's a list in your handout again of the most nutrient-dense foods. But go for color. Make it natural color, nothing neon. Fruits and vegetables, a good rule of thumb is that you want mostly vegetables, and fruits and vegetables that are the same color on the outside as they are on the inside tend to have more nutrients. Just happens that way. So berries are the very best fruit you can eat. Berries are about the only fruit that I eat anymore. So same color outside as inside. And then a rule of thumb for vegetables, if they grow above ground, generally they have more nutrients per calorie than if they grow below ground. A couple of exceptions like sweet potatoes, but mostly you want to focus on above ground vegetables. Great nutrient-dense foods, things like liver, beef liver especially, organ meats, sardines, blueberries, eggs, dark chocolate, that's a fun one, grass-fed beef and grass-fed butter. You also want to include mixed color organic vegetables, and yes, organic really does matter. Detoxification is next. But you do need to buy organic. It's worth the extra charge. And again, in quantity of food, you're getting mostly vegetables. It's just in calories that you're getting mostly fat because there are more fat calories per gram. Also include coffee, tea, and dark chocolate, all wonderful for different reasons. Caffeine is very good for the brain, and you should get your caffeine in coffee or tea. Very good for memory-enhancing effects. A 2014 article from Johns Hopkins was titled, "Caffeine Has a Positive Effect on Memory." That's just one of many that I found when I started researching this. Drink 3 to 5 cups a day. If you have trouble sleeping, don't drink it after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but 3 to 5 cups a day is great. If you make it with a gold filter instead of a paper filter, you'll get more of the antioxidants and polyphenols that you're drinking coffee for. If you drink blonde or light roasts, you'll also get more nutrients than if you drink the dark roasts. A 2010 study out of France, published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, the authors found consumption of cocoa results in acute improvements in mood, surprise, and cognitive performance during sustained mental effort. So dark chocolate and dark chocolate drinks are good for us, but don't get the sugar in those. Again, you'll hear me mention Bulletproof often. Bulletproof.com is probably one of my favorite websites. That's where I get the brain octane oil. That's where I get cocoa powder from. They have great recipes for all these drinks and for food. They have bulletproof bars that are kind of like miracle food because they not only have brain octane oil in them, they taste great. There's a mint chocolate chip one that's just wonderful. But then they also have a lot of other good nutrients like a collagen protein you'll notice your hair and your nails if you're on these collagen proteins. They just grow like crazy. It's wonderful. Include anti-inflammatory foods because remember, inflammation was one of the 5 causes of memory loss. Again, I listed these in the handout, but some important ones: coconut oil, spices. Add spices back into your diet. Experiment. The more you eat this way, I predict if you have digestive problems, stomach problems, bloating, gas, nausea, that sort of thing, it should probably improve on this kind of a diet. So you want to get spices, and hot spices are the very best for memory, and they're also the best for anti-inflammation. Cold water fish, krill, fermented foods are wonderful. Bubby's sauerkraut in the cooler section of the grocery store. Green leafy vegetables. Bone broth is a good one. That's not the same thing as just chicken broth or beef broth. Bone broth, you can make your own, and there are recipes all over the internet. Just start Googling this stuff, and there's an amazing wealth of information. Bone broth is throwing the bones and purified water and some spices, salt, and I put in some vegetables and let it simmer for about 48 hours. And so you get all of the important nutrients coming out of the bones. And last on your diet, consider adding salt back into your diet. We got scared away from this one too. I would have guessed that salt had one ingredient, sodium chloride. Turns out it doesn't. So go home and read your salt label, and if it has more than one ingredient, you probably want to buy Redmond's real salt. Most salts that I checked, and I don't know if Morton still does, but at the time they had wheat in them because that's an anti-caking agent. You're going to hear me scream about wheat in a minute, but I don't want you eating wheat. So most salts, they're demineralized, they're chemically processed, and they have a lot of additives in them in order to extend shelf life. Now, I used to think that was a fair trade-off because I was getting iodine in my salt, but it turns out, you buy that great big thing of Morton salt and you have it for 6 months, and the iodine is gone after about 2 weeks, so that doesn't really pan out. There's been a comeback of goiters in the United States, which should never happen, but we're just not getting enough sea vegetables. So things like seaweed and kelp are on there. As far as the nutrient-dense and helpful anti-inflammatory foods, you can sprinkle kelp flakes, which you can buy again at any grocery store, into your omelets, on your salads, in your soups and stews. Basically, you don't taste it, but it surely does add a lot of nutrients, and especially the important iodine. So this salt does not have iodine added. However, it does have 60 different trace minerals. So this is mined from an ancient seabed in Utah. It doesn't have the pollution problems that some of the sea salts do today after the Fukushima plant disaster that polluted some of the seas and other forms of pollution. It certainly wasn't just that. But this is an unpolluted one because it's mined from underground. So I especially like this one. Aim to get about 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams a day, and I will say, with your physician's permission, there's about 2% of the population that is salt sensitive. That 2% will probably see their blood pressure increase. My theory is if you get all of the rest of this in order, you won't be in that 2% either. But so I salt with abandon. I salt my water even when I get up in the morning because it just makes me feel better when I get up. 2006 study published in the American Journal of Medicine, sodium intake of less than 2,300 milligrams, and that's kind of important because that's the RDA, that's what you're supposed to be getting according to the government, was associated with a 37% increase in cardiovascular disease mortality and a 28% increase of all-cause mortality. This is what it's going to look like. I have been snapping photos of our meals knowing that this talk was going to come up. And basically, you just want to mix it all up. That's a hamburger with vegetables rolled into it, and I put some guacamole on top of it. Avocado is just a wonderful food. Just blend together, get creative. Lots of soups and stews and roasts and pan sautés, salads, lots and lots of salads. This is an almond wrap that is just delicious. It's by Siete. That's a company, I know it's sold at Festival Foods. And I put these Applegate sausages in butter and warm it in the microwave, wrap it up, and it's a wonderful way to start your day with breakfast. I also salt my sausage wrap. This way of eating is ketogenic, it's high fat, low carb, it's nutrient dense. Vegetables make up 70% in quantity, and fat makes up 70% in calories. This isn't the end of your happy eating. Generally, when I work with men, they're really thrilled about this. It's basically the meat and potatoes and the butter and the salt they've been wanting all along, but now they have permission. So this is a fabulous way to eat. And actually, I feel like it's sort of like wearing a school uniform. You're limited, there are rules, but it makes selecting easy. You know exactly what's allowed and exactly what isn't on this plan. You'll notice what was not in here. These are the things that you want to avoid. I think it made it pretty clear that sugar and artificial sweeteners are out. If you need sweetener, and you probably won't after time because fat makes your meals more satisfying, you really crave sugar less. I think you'll find that with heavy whipping cream in your coffee, you don't care if you have your sugar. So eliminate the sugar, but you can have stevia, erythritol, and xylitol. Those are all fine and they don't change your health in one way or another. Remove the starchy carbs. Mostly those are the below ground vegetables, but you don't want to get starch or sugars. Avoid the bad oils. The soy, corn, safflower, sunflower, canola. Those are the oils that you want to toss out today. They're easily oxidized or damaged and they're not good for you. Avoid GMO foods. Those are genetically modified foods. They're hormone disruptors, for one thing, and because they are specifically made to be Roundup resistant, that means that the food producers can spray Roundup all over the crops, get rid of the weeds, but the Roundup, of course, ends up on the food. So you don't have weeds, but you have Roundup on the end product. Avoid toxins like preservatives, dyes, molds, nitrates, mercury. There are over 80,000 chemicals approved for use in the United States that are being used every day, and a lot of them are in our food. Avoid antibiotics and hormones in your food. In 2013, 32.5 million pounds of antibiotics were sold for food-producing animals in the U.S. 32.5 million pounds. And interestingly, most of that was used for the purposes of fattening up the animals, as I mentioned. So guess what it does to us? Avoid legumes. Now that's your soy. Don't have soy, peanuts, or beans. Avoid dairy until you know if you're sensitive. I would recommend no dairy at all, with the exception of butter and ghee, for 2 months. And then do a dairy challenge where you drink a couple of big glasses of milk and you just see how you feel for that day. Especially look for balance problems. Balance is affected by dairy. The Parkinson's men that I work with are definitely affected by dairy, most of them. Now, the problem with dairy is primarily the protein casein or the sugar lactose. So the closer you get to dairy that doesn't have casein and doesn't have lactose, the better off you are. That's the hard cheeses. Butter has very little. Whipping cream has very little. Ghee has none. Ghee is clarified butter, and it's fine for everybody. Dairy with casein in it is pro-inflammatory. It promotes inflammation for everyone to some extent. Some of us are really sensitive and some are not sensitive at all. But for everyone, there is some inflammatory component to dairy. However, hard cheeses, ghee, heavy whipping cream, butter, all of those are generally fine for almost everybody. Avoid gluten at all costs. Nobody can handle gluten. It's bad for everyone. I used to think it was celiac disease or people who had non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I now believe that no one should be eating gluten ever. A cardiologist named William Davis in Milwaukee has written Wheat Belly books. Wheat Belly blog is an online resource with lots of information about grains and gluten. Grains aren't good for us, none of them. If you have to have some grain, white rice is the best, and try to limit it to a half a cup a day. I would love to see you avoid all gluten and all grains and just see how you feel after a couple of months. I made a New Year's resolution that I wasn't going to use exclamation marks as much this year. That is how important I think giving up gluten is. The worst foods that I would love to see you cut out today would be wheat, corn, and soy. Wheat most of all, for sure. There are a lot of words for wheat, so check your labels and get informed. Things like kamut, spelt, triticale, many more. Whole grain is not good, multigrain, ancient grain, Jesus bread, Ezekiel bread, spelt. All of them are bad for you. You want to give up all of them. There are really wonderful grain-free options, completely grain-free cookies, wraps, chips, pancake batters. We make our own a lot of times, and usually the base is coconut flour or almond flour. So it feels kind of good that you're getting almonds while you're eating your battered chicken. Tasty brands that I like are Siete. Birch Benders makes really great pancakes and waffles, and Against the Grain has no grains in it, but they make great breads and rolls and pizzas and that sort of thing. We use most often, like I mentioned, almond and coconut flour. And I have a lot of favorite websites, and I was going to start listing them, and they're all over the internet. Just start Googling grain-free pancakes or grain-free bread and start informing yourself. It's kind of a fun little expedition. This is the picture that proves we are not suffering. This was the chicken drumsticks we ate last week. I found that recipe online. And again, that's just an almond flour batter with a lot of spices in it, coconut oil, almond milk, and egg. So next in the treatment, we went over diet. Next up is detoxification. One of the primary causes of brain disease and memory loss, it's type 3, is the buildup of toxins in your brain. So detox your body and your environment. Mercury builds up in fish, arsenic in brown rice and in chicken. We come in contact with preservatives and insecticides and swimming pool chemicals, Teflon in our pans and on our athletic and rain gear. Roundup weed killer, as I mentioned, new construction VOCs, chemical cleaning products. There are over 80,000 chemicals. Our bodies are really good at housekeeping, but we just can't keep up with it anymore. The onslaught is too severe. Just as worrisome is this study out of Nebraska. Found that pesticide use when mapped out by county directly correlated to Parkinson's disease when mapped out by county. They didn't show a cause, but the correlation is troubling enough. So we need to get the chemicals out, and sweating is a great way to do that. You can sweat when you exercise. I also like sweating in a sauna. This one is available on Amazon. It's portable, it's small. Set it up and take it down. The little chair comes with it and fits inside. It's an infrared sauna, and that's good because the rays are much more penetrating. So you can work up more sweat at a lower temperature in a shorter amount of time. So I like this better than steam or electric saunas or smoke saunas. The benefit to this particular brand is that it's grounded, and there's some concern about what's called dirty electricity being another pollutant in our lives. This one doesn't put off dirty electricity. This one is properly grounded. You work your way up, start out at 130 degrees for 10 minutes, and eventually you'll be at 150 degrees for about 30 minutes. Can also take a bath in Epsom salts. Can pour in apple cider vinegar and baking soda. Fantastic way of detoxifying. I like to put a few drops of essential oil in mine and get a little aromatherapy at the same time. This is a great brand, but just as good as Fleet Farm bag of Epsom salts. Put in 1/2 to 2 cups, whatever you prefer and however much you're trying to detoxify, and soak. Eat cilantro and parsley. They're fantastic detoxifiers. Cilantro will change the taste of your food quite a bit, and about 30% of us taste cilantro like soap. So it's just a genetic difference. So taste it first before you ruin your entire pot of stew and don't like the cilantro. Parsley doesn't have that effect. Charcoal tablets, again, available at bulletproof.com. These tablets absorb toxins. They also, though, absorb supplements and medication. So you want to take a charcoal tablet, say, after you've been out to a restaurant meal and you know you got the wrong oils and the wrong foods and you decided to cheat. You can also take it mid-afternoon, 1 hour before and after any medication or other supplements or your good nutrients. You don't want to soak up the good nutrients from your food. For a while, I took 1 or 2 of these every afternoon. Now I think I'm doing better on health, and so now I just take them if I go out to eat. Mineral water is a fantastic way of detoxifying. There was a 2009 study at Keele University in Great Britain. 15 Alzheimer's disease patients who drank mineral water. It was 1 liter a day for 13 weeks. And at the end of the study, of the 15 Alzheimer's patients, 8 no longer deteriorated and 3 showed substantial cognitive improvement. So I like San Pellegrino because it comes with 1,057 parts per million other dissolved particles like calcium, magnesium, potassium. It's loaded with minerals compared to, for instance, Perrier is 36. So I like to drink San Pellegrino. Fiji was one in the study because Fiji is really high in silica, and silica is the primary component that bonded to the aluminum and cleared that from the brain. So I alternate. Fiji's good, San Pellegrino, and another is Gerolsteiner that isn't quite as readily available, but is high in silica and high in minerals. Avoid adding new toxins to your life. Don't use lawn chemicals, no industrial solvents, no aluminum-based deodorants. There are many that don't have aluminum in them. I like Weleda Citrus Spray-On deodorant, but there are so many. Schmidt's is at Target. Just check and see that it doesn't have aluminum in it. And check your house for mold or have your house checked for mold. Can make a tremendous difference in memory, brain fog, energy, how you feel, if there's any mold at all in your house. Things to check out that I won't cover in detail today. Airbiotics is a company that makes cleaning products made out of probiotics. The cleaning products are actually good bacteria that you spray around your house to eat up the bad bacteria. And the results last days longer than Clorox, and bad bacteria can't mutate and find a workaround to these good bacteria, at least not yet. Air Oasis is a great air purification company. Camping is a fantastic way to reset your biological clock. If you go barefoot, there are added benefits, so return to your childhood and go barefoot when camping. Has an antioxidant effect. And take nature walks. It turns out that the tree huggers were right. Trees actually have oils and substances that we can benefit from, so hug your trees. So that's diet, detoxification, and next up is exercise. Any form of exercise is good. Basically, get moving. Aerobic exercise is particularly beneficial because it promotes formation of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a protein in our brain that helps repair and regrow brain cells. It's anti-inflammatory and it helps make antioxidants. Walking is wonderful. It doesn't have to be extremely vigorous. If you break a sweat, that's added benefit because you'll be detoxifying at the same time. But it doesn't have to be vigorous, it doesn't have to be long distances, just get moving. If you think back to our caveman days, again, it's not like we were racing after prey all the time. We were also wandering around, digging in the dirt, gathering berries, that sort of thing. We also did lift the occasional zebra, so weightlifting is really good too. That's especially good for burning fats. Fat is where you store all of your toxins, so you want to burn fat to get rid of the toxins. Yoga is fantastic for breathing, meditation, balance, and strength. And basically, you just want to sit less and stand more. Set your alarm and get up and move 12 times a day when you wouldn't otherwise. All of these could really go on for an hour or two, but we're going to kind of breeze through. Sleep is the next one. There's a lot that you can do to reset your circadian rhythm and get to sleeping better. I mentioned camping, which if you're camping out away from city lights and no devices with you, no Wi-Fi, generally you'll be sleeping back on a circadian rhythm within 3 days. You want to boost your melatonin. Find ways to boost your melatonin. That's your sleep hormone, and that will improve your quality of sleep. So how do you do that? Well, sleep in a cold, dark cave, or at least mimic that. So open your window, make it cold, and we used to go to bed when the sun went down, right? We'd go into our cave when it was dark. So wear a sleep mask. There was an interesting study. Think of the population that you think of sleeping. It's teenage boys, right? Everyone knows teenage boys sleep till 1 in the afternoon if you let them. There's been an epidemic of insomnia with teenage boys, and the question was why? Family practice doctors discovered this one. The answer they discovered was all the gaming at night. So when we look at the blue sky in the morning, it turns on our hormones to wake up and get going. But unfortunately, iPads and phones and TVs and Nooks and readers all have blue light coming out of them. And so if you get that in your eyes when you're supposed to be winding down at night, that'll keep you from producing melatonin. Just reading one email on your phone right before bed will stop melatonin production for 4 hours. And melatonin is where you get your deep restorative sleep, and it's also anti-cancer. And so you want your melatonin preserved. Now, how do you do that if you've got an active life? Well, one thing is all of our devices now have night shift mode. So find out how to turn that on your phone, and it'll make the screen go a little bit more orange. It'll take the blue wavelength light wavelength that's 500 nanometers or less, are gone. Most computers can be set that way as well. You can buy bulbs and night lights that are amber. I like a website called lowbluelights.com. You can put dark spots, or they make on biohacked.com, this is all in your handout, they make little cover-ups for LED blinkers and lights and TV buttons and that sort of thing, so that you have none of that in your entire sleep area or the bathroom that you might be traveling to when you're supposed to be sleeping. You can also use electrical tape, but then you can't always see if it's on or off. So sometimes the LEDs don't work when you have electrical tape, like for a TV remote. With the dark spots, they do. Battery clock. Try to have a clock that doesn't have LED lights on it. And last is orange glasses. If you put on orange glasses, then you can do your computers, you can move about your house with the wrong bulbs, so to speak, or the bright blue lights. You will set your melatonin with orange glasses. Now, the darker, the more effective it is. If you're just reading on your computer, you might want to use these because that's ample to block that light. If you want to absolutely go into a cave, it's the darker amber red glasses. These are available on Amazon. These are the ones that my daughters and I mostly wear, and they're $9 on Amazon. They have the kind that will fit over your own glasses or the kind that are standalone. And then they're available, some of the fancier models are anywhere up to $80, $85. Okay, restless legs will keep you from sleeping. If you're waking up with restless legs, you want to check your iron levels. You want to make sure you're getting enough magnesium, and that's up to about 1,200 milligrams a day. I especially recommend taking magnesium threonate. There is a brand from Thorne called MagMind, and it's magnesium threonate, and that will start putting you to sleep. And lack of magnesium is what causes that muscle cramping. B12, omega-3 fat intake, and trace minerals should all be checked if you've got restless legs. Consider taking taurine in the morning. It's a stimulant, so you don't want to take that at night, but it does help with restless legs. And then above all, avoid diphenhydramine. And this is paradoxical because that's not only what Benadryl is, diphenhydramine, but it's also the main component in Tylenol PM, meaning it's supposed to help you go to sleep. And it's also the main component in most restless leg formulations. And 40% of the population doesn't have the enzyme they need to handle diphenhydramine properly. It's called 2D6. 40% of us are missing it. I am. So if I even take a pediatric dose of diphenhydramine, my legs are twitchy and I just feel all keyed up, and it's because I can't metabolize it. So be very careful about diphenhydramine in any of your nighttime products, especially restless leg formulas. Tea at night, small amounts, because you don't want to be running to the bathroom. Our bodies, when we have carbohydrates, our bodies say rest and digest. So you can kind of spur that on by having a teaspoon of honey in a bedtime tea, something like Yogi Bedtime. There are teas that are formulated with herbs specifically to help you sleep. And then put about 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream or brain octane oil in it, because the honey will help you fall asleep along with those herbs, and the fat will help you stay asleep. Magnesium threonate I mentioned, and then there's a tablet called Sleep Optimizer, again in your packet, that has a very, very low dose of melatonin. You never want more than 1 milligram of melatonin because it'll actually keep you awake. You'll need more and more and more melatonin, and you won't be able to sleep without it. So people end up on these huge doses, 10 milligrams. You have to keep it very small, and it'll just start your own melatonin in action. Things like valerian root, melissa balm, those are all in Sleep Optimizer. So these are the sleep no-nos, things to avoid: late night fluids, caffeine, alcohol will help you fall asleep, but it'll wake you up as soon as that inhibitory effect wears off once it's metabolized. No more than 1 milligram of melatonin, no blue light in your eyes. Don't take your vitamin D after noon. Vitamin D will keep you awake. It's what we normally form when we get sun on our skin. So take it in the morning and taurine afternoon. Supplementation. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. The first most critical one, all written up in your handbook, is vitamin D. Everyone in Wisconsin in the wintertime is low, and most of us in the summertime, because people aren't outside any longer getting sun on their skin. That's the naked part. You actually only need about 40% of your skin exposed for 20 minutes in order to get enough vitamin D to last a few days, but most people aren't even getting that. Very important to take it with K2, and this is my favorite combination because it comes suspended in an oil, and vitamin D and K2 are better absorbed when they're suspended in an oil. There's also Super K, which is in your handout, and K2 is beneficial for memory in particular. Okay, that is the end of my hour. Come back in September and I'll go over the rest of these supplements and the importance of the trillions of bacteria that live in your gut. Wrapping up, the most important suggestions that I have for today, the top 10. Fast. Go back to eating fats and brain octane oil. Eliminate the grains from your diet. Sweat. Exercise. Get no blue lights at night. Take vitamin D and K2. You can read about that in your packet. Vitamin B12, magnesium, and you want to protect all the good bacteria in your gut by eating fermented foods and taking probiotics. That was a lot to cover in 1 hour, and the question is, how possible is all of this? Make it an adventure. Make the novelty work for you. Make a study of it. Find a friend and make it happen. Thanks for coming.